We're really delighted to welcome all of you here this evening, and we're really looking forward to tonight's discussion, which is what this is. As you may know, we've got three really distinguished speakers on our panel here this evening. First, we have Dr. Danielle Prescott, who is a performance analyst, an Academy Scout at Manchester United Football Club, a talent scout for the England Lionesses, and a development consultant for Portobello Institute Sports Department. We'd also like to welcome Jenny Coe, who is Head of Performance and Wellbeing with West Ham United women's team, whilst also working across a number of Olympic sports as a high-performance coach developer and performance analyst. And last but not least, we'd like to welcome Andrew Randall Rains, who is a PhD candidate and a performance analyst with St Helens Rugby Football Club women's team, and has been involved with elite sports environment for 15 years as both a coach and as a performance analyst. So as you can see, we have three really distinguished guests with us. Before I hand you over for the night, I'd just like to let everyone know our panel are more than happy to answer any questions that you have as the evening goes on. So we'd welcome you to put some questions into our chat box, which they'll be able to answer as the evening goes on. If there is too many questions, I'm sure we'll be able to answer them after tonight. But I am going to hand you over now to our panel of experts, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you, Pauline. Just to sort of add on really to what Pauline said, it's going to obviously be myself, Andrew and Jenny that's going to be taking for the majority of this evening. The theme obviously is International Women's Day, but with a focus really on embracing equity. And although that is a shared theme, you'll hear three different sort of variations of, what it is that we're bringing, for example, to this theme for this evening. So they will be slightly different, but they will all sort of encapture the theme in terms of why we've come onto this webinar today. So Pauline mentioned about questions, so please feel free to pop them in the chat. In terms of when we will address them, Jenny's going to be the person who shares her experience with us first, and then we'll move through into Andrew's experience, and then at that point we'll sort of come back together, assess the sort of questions that are coming through, and there might be an opportunity to address some of them at that point. And then following on from that, I will obviously share my experience, and then we'll do sort of a final overall Q&A at the end in terms of anything that you sort of want to ask more holistically to us as a group, or if there's any sort of specific questions that you want to address with us individually. So I think we're ready to sort of press on now. And in that case, I'll pass over to Jenny, who's going to share her experiences with you.
Thanks, Danielle. Good evening, everybody. I don't have any slides that I prepared for this evening because I felt with such an interesting topic that I'll share some of the journey. It's a pretty unorthodox path to where I am now, some of the barriers, some mentors I've had, some of the changes I've seen over time, and some key parts of my current role that may be or maybe not of interest. And if questions come, as we've heard already, I'm happy to pause and answer them as we go, and at the end as well. So my name is Jenny Coe. I work as Head of Performance and Wellbeing with West Ham United women's team. I am not from a football background, so an interesting one to start straight away. How was I let in the door of a football environment? And actually never my ambition to work in football, so a really interesting path. But if I take back to the journey that I've had, say, in the world of sport, first and foremost, I played in Waterford with the Waterford Wildcats for a really long time. I made the national team quite early, so jumped up to senior, and at the time they were a pretty competitive team, amazing coaches, amazing level of performance, and a big jump from where I was. So really early on, from a performance as an athlete and a coach in the environment I was in, I was getting an idea of what it was like to be in high performance, what it was like to be around a lot of females who were really committed to their sport and performing at a high level, and also different types of coaching. And it's easy for me, kind of where I am now, to look back and think of all the different coaches I had, but they really have shaped, when we think of embracing equity, they really have shaped early on, through, and now how I approach the work I do, the language I use, and the behaviour. And I still have to check in with myself on how things land, and am I up to date and up to speed and informed on what I say and how can I support the environment that I'm in. So currently, the role that I'm in allows me to look after the MDT and the diversity of thought we have in that collective and eclectic group, and well-being being a more inclusive and holistic approach to high performance. And it isn't something that I had on my journey. We had physios and we had access to people kind of who were doing research projects or people who had an interest to volunteer. But the setup of that we're in at the moment is really interesting. But I also have an ally in the general manager and the manager who kind of say, Jen, like, you know, we know you're not from football, but you know, what are you bringing to the table and what are you interested in exploring and what have you seen before? So when we sit in a room together with Paul Konchesky, an ex-professional footballer since he was 16, a general manager who's been a teacher, he's been a coach for Chelsea and Liverpool before in the women's game, and that kind of diversity of thought before we even branch out to the rest of our team really inspires me and encourages me to be who I am and bring the ideas to the table. And it hasn't always been that way. It's been a struggle at the start, but I'll get to that at a later point. So that's kind of how I'm arriving today, and kind of the passion behind what I do comes from that, and the inclusion and sense of belonging I feel because my voice is heard. The title that I have and well-being, even though it's not seen anywhere at all on the Women's Super League side from a staff perspective, they're still giving me an opportunity to put it on the agenda, and to do some really great things. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Another area that I work in is with coaches. So as a coach developer across rugby league. So I currently work on a program with 12 coaches. And what's interesting to share here, I think, is there's a lot of research underpinning programs that are coming up in the UK and globally. And Leanne Norman and Sophia Jowett have done some fantastic work. And Leanne's work initially, when it looked at female coaches and why they weren't progressing through the pathway, her research came back to say it's confidence is the primary. There's a couple of other areas, but confidence is at the forefront. But what I've noticed in the last few years, I've worked for the RFL, Basketball England. I've done some work in Ireland with Unakai, the karate group, Karate Ireland rather. And all of those women are very confident, but in certain situations where opportunities haven't been provided, their confidence has been dented. So I started to explore with different projects and programs and amazing coaches that I'm working with. Is it really confidence, or is it lack of opportunity, or have we got a combination? So whilst I've seen with the rugby league in particular in the last couple of years a massive growth in confidence because there's a support network, there's WhatsApp groups, there's Spond, there's opportunities for workshops to explore themselves and their self-awareness and their understanding of a thriving environment. There's also an awareness from the RFL to go into their environment and support the coaches that are there, the committee that may have some stereotypes or gender bias, and so they might not initially look at the female coaches in their environment to progress into those head coach or senior roles. So that's been a really interesting experience. There's another area. So I've been fortunate enough to work with Dr. Amy Whitehead over the last few years on some books. So we co-edited a book on myths of sports coaching, and that particular book was interesting because I have gone through degrees and masters and stuff, but I don't see myself as a researcher. I'm not embedded in an institute, and Amy is very much at the core of Liverpool John Moore. So I came at it from what's on the ground, what can we bring to this book to support the coaches. But I was adamant, and Amy immediately agreed that we had to have diversity. We had to have a global reach. The language had to be accessible and inclusive in the book. So the book wasn't your typical book that was published. I say typical. What I see a lot is books that are £120 or £80, not affordable, hard to get through, not even portable or accessible as such, for a lot of the people who are on the ground and need the support. So that book stirred us on, and there was lovely and great reports, and it appears in different universities and different programs, and coaches have it going on train journeys and bus journeys. So we were inspired through the great people who contributed, not only to do a part two, and to be very proud that 50% of our authors were female, but to now do a women in coaching book. And it isn't a book of just nice stories. It's a book of who have been the allies in the journeys of people who've achieved who've gone on these amazing quests and achieved greatness. But also, can we inspire others and empower others to not feel like they need to have every single component and element of a job description before they apply? Can we support organizations to look inside at their job descriptions, at some of the other kind of role descriptions and requirements that might make specific jobs just a barrier? So things like travel and relocation and long times on the road and competitions and stuff. So we're not asking them to massively change their program or to dilute the quality, but just to think outside the box really when they're looking at job descriptions and role requirements and who and what they might be cutting off in doing so. So that's been really interesting to look at all the chapters coming in, how inspired I feel, and hopefully when we release the book to look at that other end of successful visibility and women in sport. So that's some of the kind of interesting things. But only this week as well, just a little bit of a boost. I'm on a webinar and there's 42 women representing different organizations, and they're all talking about the things that they're doing. And I sometimes when I'm on the conveyor belt of work, I don't kind of pause to look at what's going on elsewhere. I just kind of keep going and try to support the environment and culture that we're trying to create at West Ham. And I'm sitting there and I think, oh my goodness, like I wasn't aware that this is happening in this pocket. So it could be about more research and support for education around menstrual cycle, around menopause, a growth in certain sports, investment wise around coaches to support pathway transitions for female coaches, and the growth of athletes visibility, female athletes. So lots of really cool things happening there this week that it kind of said, how aware are we of the brilliant things that are going on? And sometimes do we get caught looking at what we haven't got as, say, female coaches, or in high performance sports, the representation of female sports. So it's really positive to hear so many things going on there. So it hasn't all been bells and whistles and lovely stories along the way. I mentioned when I played at Wildcats and had an involvement of going, international program. I wanted to go to international level coaching. I thought that was the pinnacle of coaching. And, fortunately, Wildcats gave everything we needed from an athlete's perspective growing up. But I very rarely saw female coaches. And there was a really long string of coaches over a core period of me as an athlete. And actually early on I was transitioning into a coach. So I was early, probably about 16, starting to coach and then playing alongside that. And a lot of what I did at the early time of my coaching was to mimic the other coaches that I'd had as an athlete. I didn't know any better, or what I'd learned on a formal qualification through the governing body, mainly delivered by men. And I thought, well, I need to get this certification so I am good at this. And this is the way they've told me it's done. This is the language they've used, so I'll do it. These are the pictures that have been on the presentation that appear to be men's basketball. So gosh, okay, that's what I've got to do. And so when I look back at how I coached originally, it was just absolutely atrocious. It was autocratic. It was closed-minded. It wasn't holistic. I didn't have a good support network. I didn't have role models that I felt at the time I probably thought were brilliant coach role models. But I don't know if I was able to really understand how I could put my spin on it. What am I missing here? And you don't know what you don't know, really. So whilst I as an athlete, I felt I was getting amazing coaching, but when I went into coaching, I didn't know if I knew how to create great relationships. I didn't know how I could support the person in front of me. And so that's something over the course of all my coaching years, into the years I did performance analysis and sports psychology, into the role I'm in now, that I've tried to understand the importance of not just looking outside the sport that I'm in. So what is happening in rowing that I can use in football now and basketball at the time, what's happening in rugby, going to watch other coaches so I would know what good looked like, listening to how people speak when I work as a coach developer in different environments, so that I can really see and feel and hear what diversity and inclusion and embracing equity looks like in these environments, and not just kind of sitting behind a screen kind of going, okay, I need to write down this definition and this definition, and knowing then, you know, how my message is landing when I speak, and hopefully having the safety and environments, particularly at West Ham, for people to go, oh gosh, do you really mean this, or has that landed, this has landed in this way, or so yeah, that getting to that safe space is really important. But in that interesting journey, I think one of the key things that I mentioned it there was the support network, and sometimes support network, sometimes an infrastructure of who are the good people, but also who the people are going to challenge you in the right way at the right time. And I was fortunate enough to have some mentors along the way. And somebody asked me this question only a couple of months ago, like, who were those mentors, and where did you go and seek them? Or, you know, now it's easy for me because I'm aware and informed on the importance of having supervision in sports psychology, and having a supervisor for different pathways and education pieces that I'm on. But at the time, when I first started working in the governing body, there was a guy called Martin Hare, and Martin was the technical director at the time, and I just felt like he took me under his wing a little bit and showed me a little bit of the ropes, but it was just in a real caring way, a real informative way, a real caring way, but just any opportunity to, I mean, we went to Turkey together to the World High School Championships, and he was introducing me to different people and speaking so highly of me when we were there. And I remember thinking at the time, it was years and years ago, gosh, like he really respects me. And in other areas of the sport and previous jobs I'd been in, I didn't get that and I didn't feel that. I just thought I'd found a really amazing kind of mentor. He wasn't my manager at the time, wasn't my boss, but I guess at the time, the label mentor I wouldn't have put on. And we subsequently coached together and, you know, mapped out and had many an evening planning how we would make all things right in the world. But started me on a path to say, okay, this is a different type of support from somebody who you might need in a different space at certain times. But as your journey goes on and different people come in and out of your life, Denise Martin was another woman. And Denise, again, I think I'd been in a space for a really long time in many different roles as a semi-professional athlete, kind of having little jobs that worked around training and games, and you played every weekend. So they had to be like, yeah, you can work Sunday for 2 hours and Thursday for an hour and a half. And so when I came to looking for a real job and I finished my master's in sports psych, there was I was doing performance analysis with Wexford, and Denise Martin said to me, you know what, Jen, I'm working in Dublin. I'd love you to come up, and I believe you do a great job. And I was like, gosh, oh my gosh, like I don't know if I will, Denise. It's a bigger setup. They'll demand more. There's, 22 backroom staff and only one other female at the time, the nutritionist. I said, how will I survive? Because I've been in, female environments for so long. And I probably didn't even at the time know the importance of having that experience, but jumping into this experience. And again, Denise introducing me to loads of different people, putting me forward, challenging, supporting from kind of behind the screen, not necessarily, holding my hand the whole way through, but just really instrumental in feeling what was the best word? Feeling a sense of somebody's looking out for you, somebody's giving you an opportunity, somebody cares about what journey you go on and also values your input and your work ethic. So again, not a boss as such, a role that I was navigating to possibly make a full-time role out of now that I'd had a master's in sports psych and I'd become accredited with the Irish Institute as a performance analyst. And I thought, wow, like here's a cool opportunity. And Denise was instrumental in also flying a female flag, pushing you into those environments of 20 staff and saying, she's brilliant. I'm going to step away. Jen's going to do this role, listen to her. And, I obviously had to make my own in that environment as well. But then again, going back, talking about allyship, I'm in the environment I'm in now because I was working as a head coach in the University of East London, a basketball coach, and a guy came in with a whole group of players. What were they? Students, not players. And so the college were coming in and all the boys were training. And I didn't know this guy from Adam, a teacher that comes in, head of sport at the time, but I didn't know, I didn't ask the title. And I just walked over and I said, why are none of your girls playing any sport? And he said to me, well, they're not interested and they probably, they might not. Are you interested in showing them a few, shooting hoops or whatever the terms were that he used? And I said, absolutely. And I went over and a few of them were a bit kind of hesitant. They weren't in the kit or even in any training kit. And then we played some games, and then the boys are looking over and going, oh, something over there is happening. It's a bit fun. We came together, we made a team, they won some games. It was a really interesting experience for me, I guess, on the journey I'd been on, having the confidence to go over and say, hey, listen, what's going on here? Why are the girls not getting equal opportunity? And for him to say, well, do you want to try something? So this same guy, 4 years later, or maybe longer, maybe 6 years later, I'd have to think of the timeline, says to me, I'm after getting the general manager's job at West Ham. I don't know what role, because I know you're not in football, but I really want you in. He said, I don't want you to just do coach development. I don't want you to just do sports psychology. I want you to look at the culture and the environment, and I want it to be inclusive, and I want our staff to have diversity of thought, and how we approach looking after and supporting and unlocking the potential and maximizing the potential of the athletes that we have. So I said, right, 2 feet, I'm in, let's do it. And yeah, football here, the Lionesses have had amazing opportunities to spotlight sport, women in football, women in coaching. But it's also what I've noticed from a West Ham perspective, that we've moved our staff from 1 female full-time member of staff to 5. We have now got female staff changing rooms, which sounds so incredibly silly, but we came into the men's academy environment, so we kind of work and operate there together. And there wasn't enough for the growing female staff and presence that we have. We didn't have enough changing space. So then they create a building with showers and toilets. Again, it sounds so silly, but the perception sometimes is that football is just rolling in money. And women's sport, although there's a massive, women's football, and there's a massive kind of growth and spotlight from a media perspective, there's a lot of clubs that are still growing their facilities, the staff, the education. So the journeys over time have been supported for me with great mentors, a lot of positivity, but also the challenge of the gender bias. And I still hear it trickled in our environment. Girls do this, and girls, when I coach them, they like this. I said, oh, do they really? But I've learned over time to not jump in and start waving the flag or stomp somebody out. I need to understand that in not just the environment I'm in now, but other environments that I operate in, that some people that I'm speaking with, their relationships with females may have been teachers, family, friends, and they possibly have never had a female coach, or they don't know what that interaction to create a relationship from a professional capacity is like. So I'm always now keen to ask, like, I wonder where that came from. I wonder what the intent of that statement and word was, even if it sounds really outrageous, because then we can have a conversation and I'm not just coming in and making people feel threatened as I try to stomp out different things. And there's then hopefully, with the growth of our staff being more representative, more real, kind of more role models for other people. I went and did a talk in a university the other day, and there was 15, 16 people that came to sit down, students and some lecturers. And the students said, I have no interest in doing coaching, but I really want to have an opportunity to do sports management. I want what your job says up here, and the well-being piece I haven't heard before. And I thought, well, come over and shadow. And we open our environment all the time because, as I said at the start, if people have an opportunity to know what good looks like, I'm not saying that we're, gold standard at all, but they might add fresh eyes. They might ask questions that I haven't thought about. And it just gives us another way to reconnect with the community, reconnect with East London, or reconnect with anybody who's interested in being a presence in a football environment for the multitude of roles that we can now offer. So so that's, I'd say I could wrap up probably around there. I don't know, Danielle, if I'm on time or not on time, but that's a little bit of a whirlwind stop of key people and parts of the journey, and some of the growth of what I've seen in football.
No, that's absolutely fascinating, Jenny. And I think your pathway has not been linear at all, which I think is normal, very much up and down, which is good. I've got a question, if that's okay, and then I think we've got one in the chat before we move on to Andrew. So if you had to give any advice to someone who was potentially coming up against females who were maybe a little bit afraid or hesitant about venturing into sport because they were thinking, it's not really going to be that easy for me to make it as a career. And I'm thinking of it from a gender perspective because it does still happen and there is still that hesitancy. Is there any particular advice that you would give to the people that could help them on that journey, I would say, and encourage them?
Gosh, that is a brilliant question. Where I'm gone on that answer, Danielle, is personal and professional. I'm thinking, I know many people who haven't enjoyed professional sport or high performance sport because they haven't felt included or for, a number of different reasons I've mentioned. So I think there's an understanding of your passion, and it's probably cliched there, like, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? I say to the players when I speak to them in different occasions or different events, like, are we playing the game or are we changing the game? And I'm in this role not as a stepping stone into the men's game. I love the idea that I can, in any tiny way, change the narrative around females in sport, how we coach females. Boys are different to girls. If I hear it one more time, I'll lose my mind. So it's just trying to, I guess, from a personal, this advice piece would be, why are you doing this? What experience can you get in different environments before or as you're applying? Reaching out to people. I think COVID was a great period where people were more free and open with their time, but it seems to have rippled. I message people all over the world and go, oh, I saw your post on Twitter. Would you be interested in connecting? And they're like, yeah. And then I'm sitting down with the head sports psych for the USA men's football team, soccer team. And I'm like, well, that was good. That's cool. Or a guy who works for the Toronto Raptors and blah, blah, blah. So it's great to have this, but it's understanding that possibly from a personal angle or even your close network, that their experiences, lived experiences, their perceptions may not be the reality, and getting an idea along with the drive and passion to make it work. But then also reflection. So that other piece, that key part for me, is sitting down and going, what happened today? How did it make me feel? What can I do next? Who can I soundboard my thoughts on this with? I think from a professional capacity is knowledge is really, really important. A lot of the stuff that I hear it a lot, like, oh, that's just how it is in football. And I go, is it? What's underpinning that? What's the latest research? So knowing your stuff is really important. And what the stuff is, depends what, your skill set is and where the angle, the entry point in. So connections, as I said, from either angle, both personal for development or, in the door, connecting with people, asking the questions, and people will connect you with others. So there's loads once you get in the environment, but it would be wrong of me to say based on our environment, because we've grown and people would be welcome to absolutely come over or to hop on a webinar and have a further chat with me if they were, because I know it can be nerve-wracking if the placement has been a short period of time to then go, right, I'm ready to be a practitioner, I'm ready to be leading this team or jumping into this space. But there's a part about their own development and knowing the role and direction. And then I think knowing the scope of what you are going into, the knowledge base of, actually, here's some information I can offer. Here's what I can bring to the table when I go there.
Yeah, I guess there's like a self-confidence aspect to that as well, in the sense of being very assured about your ability and being confident enough to say, actually, I belong here amongst these people. And I think that's definitely something that I've experienced personally, but I'll save that for my talk anyway. Just one question probably before we move on, Jenny, is Pauline's asked, she sort of stated that mentorship is really important when people are trying to start out in industry. But what she's asked off the back of that is if you're aware of any sort of framework for mentorship, maybe based on your experience, or is it more sort of an ad hoc, person by person basis in terms of how mentorship seems to work?
Gosh, that's a really good question. Interestingly, what I've seen in the last probably 5 years is a surge of people seeking mentorship and coach development. And what worries me sometimes is with that surge, then comes the need for everybody to go, I can do that, I can do that, and not knowing the boundaries of their role or their support. I think mentorship probably a little bit less in the sense that it can be fluid and it can be conversational. I think from a coach developer point of view, what I've seen is people who again maybe lack a bit of self-awareness and emotional intelligence going into those roles, into those environments with people who are possibly maybe, yeah, a lot of high performance coaches, well, a good chunk of them that I worked with, they would be isolated, they wouldn't be supported very well, they'd be quite lonely, and then someone comes in and has like the silver bullet for them. So it's interesting how it's grown. Like I work for a wish mentoring program that runs through Hertz Uni. It means that I get a chance to see what mentorship and mentees and that relationship in the Philippines, in South America, in North America looks. And I haven't had that global kind of reach from that angle, but they have kind of given loose frameworks in the structure of that to kind of say where the person currently is or where you're both currently at, the reflection piece, some informed kind of decisions that you can incorporate into the conversation and an action. So it's really frameworks for interacting as opposed to frameworks for the system. And I think I've seen for the system of how you instigate it and how you get it going. There's a number of so indirectly, the way I'm getting at it is there's lots of different programs popping up, and from a structured point of view within that, I've seen many frameworks being used as a vehicle for conversation within the relationship, but I haven't seen many frameworks for mentoring in the structure of setting up a mentoring program. That, like, I've seen kind of support for the mentor and the coach, the communicator, the role that you'll play, and kind of prepping people and having pre-webinars and as a mentee. But I've also seen organizations, last point on this, saying, we're going to run, are you interested in being a mentor? And I think the contracting part is really interesting there, that like when people volunteer, I think it can be also going back to the detrimental piece. It can also be if somebody signed up to be mentored or to connect with a mentor, for that contracting piece not to be done right. Like, what does this look and feel like? What should the support of a mentor feel like? And know that, so that the person isn't dipping in and dipping out, and that relationship is kind of, with exceptional listening, is built on a good solid foundation. I don't know if that's directly answered the question, but it's really got me thinking about, well, actually, what have I seen? And it is popping up everywhere. So
I think it's a tough question, actually. And I think it's one of those that you would like to think is only going to change as sort of research evolves about what's going to be more efficient and work in different aspects. So I agree with what you're saying in the sense of it's very different. It will be on a person by person basis or an organisation basis. So yeah, thank you very much, Jenny. And
yeah, you're welcome.
I think what you've shared with us is really insightful. I think hopefully the people that are on the call will have taken a lot from it. And I think you've definitely earned the right to turn your camera off while you listen to Randall, if that's what you want to do. So yeah, we'll move on to the next speaker now. But yeah, thanks a lot for that, Jenny. It was,
no problem. I'll get
brilliant.
my pen and paper ready for my questions to him.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny.
Perfect. So to move on to our next speaker now, we're going to bring in Andrew Rains, who is conducting his PhD at the moment. But in terms of why he's here in terms of the webinar today, is his experience as working as a performance analyst with St Helens Rugby Football Club, predominantly the women's team. But there's a lot more to Andrew's journey than just that team, and I'm sure he'll explore that. Not to put any pressure, Andrew, but I'm sure he'll explore that with you before we sort of see if there's any questions once he's concluded his presentation.
Cheers, thank you, Danielle. Yeah, you maybe put me on the spot there a bit, but no, it's fine. I'll talk a little bit then about how I got into rugby league, I think, in general, and then maybe how I transitioned from that into the women's game. And then I must admit as well that I am now back in the men's game, but that was more of a personal decision more than anything else, if that makes sense, because I would still love to be with the women. They're a fantastic group. So yeah. this was years, I can't remember years, but quite a long time ago, I learned how to use sports code as a teacher. So I used it. I also had access to it, and I was using it for a couple of sports and stuff like that as well. And then Wigan Warriors got a wind of this, and more importantly, a guy called Craig Richards was the one who really got wind of it. So I've turned up with Craig on many occasions to sort of meetings and stuff, and he's gone, right, you know how to use a computer, don't you? Wigan are in need of somebody who's got access and who can use it. Are you interested in getting involved? So that was at a scholarship level where I started, but then I swiftly moved up to the first team as well with their match day performance analysis, working to help set up a system, etc. So it's essentially moved that way. Obviously in a bit of a nutshell, and that was probably quite typical within the sort of game. That you sort of your networking and stuff like that's quite vital. So yeah, but then on the back of it, I still kept in touch with Craig, and Craig moved to St Helens. Then he came up to me and sort of proposed this role with the women's team, to say, look, you can be the analyst and the coach, because it was a little bit of a dual role at the time. So even at scholarship, I was at Wigan Warriors scholarship, I was still the coach more than the analyst. But yeah, so obviously I thought, yeah, what a great opportunity, something different. It has ability to go here, there, and everywhere as well, and do different things after it as well. And I just like the challenge. So essentially, I'd say I arrived at St Helens, assistant coach, and then I generally did the performance analysis more than anything. But what was interesting, and maybe this is something I might start talking about, is with rugby league and the women's game, it's transitioning, and potentially it still is, from what is known as grassroots to the more professional, or I don't know what the terminology they want to use, but the performance side of it is moving more towards that. There are still a lot of teams who currently still exist who are not within the performance realm. But I know St Helens were really keen for that. So in my inception as that, it was the very first year that the Women's Super League was actually run and developed, which I think has been a great opportunity for women in terms of giving them better opportunities to develop their game, just be rugby players, I think. And then obviously get opportunities on the back of it as well. So that was like really exciting to be a part of that. There was obviously like the transition side of it is probably what's quite interesting. You've got essentially, I don't want to say volunteers as such, but people who just play for the love of the sport. So all of a sudden, right, you need to have a training program. You're going to have so many sessions a week. You have to attend this. They did concussion talks. We've done all sorts, and it's really interesting in terms of myself, because they'd never really had any sort of performance analysis before. They never had the scrutiny that a performance analyst can bring, as well as obviously a lot of the good stuff. The videos, the development of cognitive excellence, etc. And they never really had that interaction before, because it was mainly the grassroots. So I mean, I was there for 4 years as well, and like the transition over them 4 years has been really useful, because I think sometimes I don't know what everybody else thinks as well, but all of a sudden there's somebody there with a camera and they're clipping everything you do, they're counting all the stats, etc. I think that sort of that microscope stuff can really affect people. Some people take it really positively. Some people loved it, and some I was getting pestered all the time. Can I have this clip? What's my stats here? Is that a win? Is that a loss? It's like, oh, right, okay, which is fantastic. But then you also get the other side where people are like, oh, when you're doing team reviews, because that's something that had never been done before. Team reviews, get everybody in a room. By the way, I'm going to show you all some clips, and we're going to dissect the game, what's happened, individual performances, etc. Then after that as well, I may sit you down as an individual and go through some of your individual stuff. That had never happened before. That had never occurred within the women's game. Thankfully now it's really accepted as a practice. So much so, like there are. I'm trying to remember the name of the company, but there is a company involved who does the statistical data for them. They're floating around XML sheets and data for the girls' game as well. And the England setup, they get even more. So yeah, for me that was sort of really interesting to be involved in that and to see their development. Because now I think they're all craving it. I recently met with a player as well who shall mention nameless, but she was talking about one of the games that they'd actually lost. And she actually said, and I was quite humbled by it, and I don't believe it, but she quite literally said, because without your analysis, that was the reason why we lost. And for me, that said quite a lot in terms of how the journey goes. And I said, I don't believe her because, that's sport. And I'm not saying, if I'd have shown her some clips and data that they'd have won the game, I don't think that. But I think what she was getting at was the importance of it, performance analysis, and how it embedded into their workflows and stuff like that. So that for me was like, I'd say I was very humble, and I thanked her obviously, and I was really grateful. But I could see what she was trying to get at, and that dissection of the game, but the team really embraced with it and engaged with the analysis side. And then obviously as an assistant coach, I was able to then transition what we'd learned or what we'd been through and actually apply it onto the pitch, because I was still on the pitch coaching. So that was quite interesting. In terms of other environments, I haven't seen any other female performance analysts, but in general speak, actually, I haven't seen any performance analysts other than I think Castleford had one, and I forgot his name. And he also used to work at the England, so I don't think it's actually more engaged. Now, I'm happy to be wrong and prove wrong and stuff like that, but there certainly isn't any females, and there's certainly, I don't think there's any males either. But maybe that's just because it's a developing sport. And again, I've mentioned that they're transitioning from grassroots to performance. So yeah, hopefully that'll change, and we'll get the right people in the right place. I think that's always key. So yeah, probably adding to that, and I know, like Danielle was, so we talked about it maybe as a discussion point, the difference between coaching men and women. So again, in terms of coaching and analyst, I'm talking as a coaching and analyst, because I sort of do dual roles. When I was at Wigan Warriors, mainly with the scholarship, and then obviously transitioning to the women, I don't think there is any difference in terms of the gender doesn't define them. They're just rugby players, and they all want to win. They all want to do the best. They all want to, just strive for excellence. But I think there's traits that are different. Now, I don't know. This is maybe my experience. So I'm not saying that this is set in stone. It's just purely my experience. But I think the traits were slightly different. Now, it could just be that I had them groups and I didn't test it. I haven't tested anything like that. But again, I am happy that they're just rugby players. That's all they are. It doesn't matter about gender. But yeah, like certainly the biggest thing I found in terms of traits was the females ask a lot more questions than the men. And that is both a good thing and a bad thing. Because with the men, like I could say to them, right, we're going to run this shape, let's go and run it. And they do it. And it's like, you need to question why you're doing this stuff, have that engagement side of it. So, that's something where the men lacked. But again, on the other side as well, the girls ask them questions and it's fantastic and they engage with it. They want that understanding because, again, they're striving for excellence and they want to win, just like anybody. But then, again, sometimes they ask too many instead of experiencing things. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of traits that I saw. But they're all got the same end goal. They all want the same thing. There is no difference. They're all just rugby players, which is great because I just love talking about it. Talk about the game. Now, I think, obviously, again, I've mentioned the difference between grassroots and obviously the women getting into performance. And I think because of that, there hasn't been like that structure that the men have had in terms of how they progress as players. You know, it's very much, I'm trying to remember the age, and I could be wrong with this, but I'm sure until under 11s, the girls played with the boys. And after that, the girls are almost scratching around for, is there a rugby team, a female rugby team anywhere? Quite a few obviously transitioned to rugby union because there was more teams available. So in terms of that structure, there maybe hasn't been that. So with men, it was dead easy. You're under whatever, under 11, 12, 30, 40, you go into 15, 16s as scholars, and then you've got 18s if you're in the elite environment to progress straight through. If not even in the amateur game, you've still got 18s to the first team, etc. But the girls haven't had that just yet. But that is changing, and that's great to see. I know as St Helens, we've obviously got an under 19s now. We often do camps for the under 16s, etc. We're also in the local community all the time. And when I say we, by the way, I don't think I can include me in that. I'm talking about like your Jenny Wellesby's, for example. She works as part of the community section. You Craig Richards, constantly on the phone to people and trying to develop clubs, both men and women. So I think you'll see some better players coming through. But I think the knowledge of the girls is maybe lacking because of that structure. But they're certainly developing. But also, like, there's some really good stuff to look forward to and to see within the game. It is mainly male dominated in terms of the outcome. In terms of the women's game, but you're also now that's changing because you've also got the likes of Amanda Wilkinson at Barrow Raiders, Lois Fussell at Leeds Rhinos, Lindsay Anfield at York. They're all the head coaches of them. So there isn't that oversight of, well, you're a female or thingy, so you can't coach, etc. I don't think that exists. But they've certainly got the right people in the right places. But I know Lois is like absolutely perfect for Leeds. Obviously, we want to beat them, by the way, and I'm not going to dispute all that type of stuff. But she's the right person in that environment, and I think that's the key. As well, we've got Matty Smith currently at the moment with the Saints girls, and again, he's the right person for that. And then Jenny Wellesby sits underneath him as well as an assistant coach because she's learning more about and developing the game. So Matty Smith was also a past player as well, and he's transitioning into coaching. And there was a spot available essentially. He applied and was successful. Jenny Wellesby was an ex-player for England as well, currently going through there. Lois Fussell was an ex-England player as well at Leeds. So there's different pathways which are now also coming through, whether they are former players or they've had experiences elsewhere to come into the game as well. I think it's good to see that it's been opened up and it's just becoming the right people in the right place as well. And hopefully that gives a bit of an insight into it. One of the most interesting things, and I've certainly got it in big letters here as well. Recently there was a World Cup in England. The men's squad, the female squad, and the England wheelchair, I think they're called England men, England women's, England wheelchair, were all paid the same, which I think is a real step forward for both the wheelchair anyway and the female game, to show where it has been in terms of that grassroots to now being considered as an elite and performance, certainly. But yeah, they were all paid the same, all treated the same, all had the same resources, etc., which I think is a real testament to the sport. But it's not always based on the outcomes as well. It's based on what's been deserved, I think. And considering, like, I'm trying to remember the date, sorry, but considering like female sports has obviously had a bit of a hindrance, and it's even been banned in certain sports. I think a former student told me, or a student, so he said 1971, like football was banned and stuff like that. I'm happy to be corrected, by the way, on that if I've got the wrong year or I've got the wrong time. But you know, in that period of time to now where they are, and they're being paid as players at the top end, and it is starting to sink in now as well to some of the Super League teams as well. There is pay. I don't think that's important as such. I think there's still the desire to be rugby players, which I think is the best bit about it. But yeah, it's certainly encapsulating and invigorating, and it's moving forward. There's the right people in the right places. There's people being developed. You know, even the likes of Jodie Cunningham, Emily Rudge, Chantel Crowell, etc. They're all doing coaching badges as well. Just to get an insight into coaching, and then maybe if that's something they wanted to do as well. So again, that pathway's never really existed as well for them, and now it's there, and they're being mentored. Now whether they go into it or not is another matter, you know, and it may not be the case, but there's certainly the opportunity for them within the female game. And I would never say never in the men's game as well. I know Amanda has coached in the men's game. She was also the first ever level 3 coach, I believe. You know, it could be across any sport that, and I'm happy again to be corrected, but she was certainly one of the first level 3 female coaches. She's also coaching a men's team, UCLan as well. She was coaching the men's team with me as well. So there are some insights into it, and it is getting there. Now, yeah, it's not happened at the elite level, but again, there are only, well, I want to say 12 leagues in Super League, and everything else below that isn't really like football. It's not like has that big impact in the money and the revenue, etc. So even the lower teams in the championship teams still are not enough to be full time. Most of them are part time players. I think there's only maybe Toulouse that are full time. But again, like maybe these insights in the future, you know, just looking forward, would be considered. I don't see no reason why not. But again, it's always that having the right person in the right time, in the right place, doing the right job. But again, there's no reason why that couldn't be a female, etc. So yeah, for time, sorry, I didn't really time it up. I'm all right. I've gone over. I'm spot on.
Yeah, I think we're. If you're happy to draw the line there, I think we're all right with time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned about quite at the beginning that females seem to be a little bit more engaged with the analytical process, and that comes through in the form of the questions that they ask.
Yeah.
Have you noticed whether that curiosity then translates into improved performance, or whether it doesn't make that much of a difference?
If you look at it statistical wise, then yeah. So if you compare to like doing it on season 1, doing their stats, and yeah, some qualitative, some quantitative. I get that. I appreciate that. But you certainly compare them to what they're like in season 4 when we won the treble. Huge differences, you know, and even stuff like, and maybe some of the little small stuff where they come in and go, right, I know my win stats are this week. I'm really happy about it. And some people even talk to me in the sheds about it. They go, right, Randall, I'm going to make sure that my win is this percentage this week, you know. And so I think it is transitioning to the actual performances themselves. Okay. But that's obviously my view, and that isn't founded in research or anything, by the way. It's just, you know.
It's not all about research, is it? It's about practice. It's what actually happens, though.
Yeah.
No, that's really good, actually, and it's insightful, because I think it's very encouraging that, you know, to ask questions is not a bad thing, and actually you can get some sort of positive output from it. Absolutely. So I think that's something I took from obviously what you said. Obviously you've got quite a heavy background in rugby, and you've talked about the the sort of lack of female representation, I would say, in terms of backroom staff, even though it seems to be growing from what you said.
Yes, absolutely.
But then if you then sort of compare that to other sports, in your opinion, does it feel like rugby is behind or ahead, or
in terms of having female background staff?
Just female representation, really, across the sports.
Across the sports at the elite levels, I wouldn't know without knowing too much about the other sports. I obviously know about football, and obviously from what Jenny spoke about as well. I think that's thing, but I wouldn't say we're behind, and I wouldn't say we're ahead. I think we're doing. It was obviously in a place where it never existed, so I think to go right over 4 years since we've done this, and there's change happening, and I think it's just going to take time. Does that make sense for it to filter through? Which all of it has done. Even the money side, the revenue side, is took 4 years for it to start creeping in. I think it's just a time out, but I won't say we're behind. I think there's some, like I say, to have the women, the men, and the wheelchair all paid the same, I think is obviously quite well. It's very good, obviously. Yeah, I'm trying to think of terminology wise, but yeah, without swearing. You see, I'm trying my best not to swear. But essentially, yeah, I wouldn't say we're behind. Is there stuff that we can improve on? Yeah. I wouldn't like to sort of mention what they would be, etc. But because that'll just be me gossiping, etc. Maybe. But yeah, I think there's always stuff. But we're striving forward.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key. We're not going backwards.
I was just going to say, do you think that's the key? The fact that there's been progression rather than sort of determining whether it's forwards or backwards in comparison to other sports?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as we can all do what we can do when we're moving forward.
Perfect.
That's key.
It is. It feels a little bit sad that we're at a point where we're really celebrating the fact that people are paid the same. That feels sad, but I understand that why we do celebrate it. It just feels sad that we're in that situation where we have to.
Yeah, no, of course I get that. But again, if you give it a time span, and obviously, like I mentioned about the female sports even being banned, so that puts it back even further. Was it 50 years ago it was banned or something like that?
No, it was. Was it football?
Further?
Football was banned in 1921, and the ban got lifted in 71.
Right. Sorry, that was my sort of interpretation.
You can blame it on your student that gave you that misinformation.
Blame it on the student. I won't even tell her a name, but yeah. But you know what I mean. To have that knockback is thinking, and it's the same in men's sports. So European countries that have banned rugby league. So and this is the men's game, the banned rugby league, because they saw it as whatever they saw it as, and that puts everything back. And they've almost had to go like grassroots and build up again, and it is developing. So I think it's just the sport, maybe, or maybe that's just too broad. But yeah, broad of an answer.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said it's progressive, and I think that's kind of, moving forward is better than not moving at all, isn't it? So that's kind
absolutely,
of a good message, I suppose, to leave it on. But thank you, Andrew, for the insight that you shared, and I think it's just as insightful as Jenny's was in terms of your experiences and trying to obviously show us the rugby side of things, and were women fit in that, or we seem to be lacking a little bit at the minute. But like we said, the key message is that there is progression there, and you would hope to think that that's going to go even further as we go. As we continue
absolutely,
forward.
Yeah, and you look at the participation rates as well; they're going through the roof. So, yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, if you're all right with that, we'll move on to the final speaker, which is myself. So I don't need to introduce me. But if you've got any questions, Andrew, that you want to ask me, then feel free to pop it in, and we can always pick up on that. So,
cheers, thank you.
No worries. So we'll move on to my sort of experiences and really trying to highlight my trajectory. So very similar to Jenny in the sense of how things have come about. It's similar to Jenny in the sense of it hasn't been linear. It's been very much sort of peaks and troughs all the way through. And the pathway that I'm on now has never really been planned. It just sort of happened in the way that it has, and I'll try my best to explain the bits that I can understand why those things happened, and things that, you know, from maybe someone who's giving some advice, things that people might want to avoid if they were sort of thinking of similar pathways, for example. So my journey has been very sort of parallel to each other. So I've always sort of had an academic journey and a practitioner journey, and I never planned for the academic journey. It was never the thing I wanted to do. If someone said to me, you're going to be teaching and you're going to have done that for 15, 16 years at university level, I wouldn't have believed them, because first off, it's not the thing I wanted to do. But second, I probably would have not really believed that that is the thing I could have done at that particular moment in time. So I was very fortunate that as a undergraduate student, I was given opportunities to go out and get some work experience, and I was kind of set on the career that I wanted, and that career was in performance analysis. And at the time, performance analysis was very broad. It was very vague as well in terms of what that entailed. It's not like today where there's different offshoots of opposition analyst, post-match analyst, pre-match analyst, data analyst. It wasn't like that. It was very much an umbrella term. And whilst I was doing my undergraduate degree, I got the opportunity to go and experience what it was like as a performance analyst. And I did the majority of my experience took place at Bolton Wanderers. So as a Blackburn fan, that's not the greatest place for me to go, but it was an experience that I was able to do. And it kind of felt like a really good opportunity. And in that particular year, so this is how long ago it was, Bolton were actually a Premier League team. So this was in the 2007-2008 season. And I got the opportunity to go and work with the academy, predominantly the under-18s. And what that encompassed was going to the games at the weekends, filming the games, coding the games on the analysis software, and then doing a report and feeding that back. And because obviously you had the restrictions of it being, you know, the club it was at that time, which was a Premier League academy, you didn't have the luxury of being able to do things like deliver feedback, for example, to the players. So it was all done via the people that were there full time. So it was a great opportunity. And I actually understood that at the time. So I think I was quite mature probably for the 20-year-old I would have been at that point. And I understood how much of a great opportunity it was, because there was people in similar positions to me that really wanted chances like that, but just for some reason or another didn't get them. What happened during that period was that the academy season tends to finish around April, May, and that's not any different today. But the first team season obviously continues, and in that particular year, Bolton were fighting relegation. So they kind of needed all hands on deck. And because obviously I was there as a student doing things in the academy, academy's now finished. It's like, well, Danielle's still here. Do you want to do some first team things? So that was an even better experience, because still as a student, getting an opportunity as an analyst with the first team Premier League club is not something I expected. But I took it. Didn't get anything back for it in terms of, I don't even think I got my fuel allowance back. I don't think I got anything. The only thing I got was the Bolton Wanderers kit. And as I say, as a Blackburn fan, that's not going to be something I'm wearing unless I'm actually in the club. So it was great. It was great in terms of the players that you were around. And at that time, the academy and the first team were sort of merged together in the same building. So when you were there for the academy, you were also sort of seeing all the first team players. So players like Kevin Davis, Kevin Nolan, who else was there at the time? Gary Megson was the manager at the time that I was there. So there was a lot of people that were sort of high profile that you were around, and they were brilliant to learn off, because, like I say, I wasn't expecting it, and I really relished it. I felt anyway. So what sort of came off the back of that was because I got some experience actually in a club setting, and analysis was relatively new at that time, there was a really big gap for education, because if you've got something that's relatively new, you tend to need someone there to actually train people how to do this, new sector that's come up. That's where the door sort of opened for me from an academic perspective, because analysis was so new that you only needed maybe 1-2 years worth of experience to be classified as significantly experienced. So that really put me in a really favourable position to help me in terms of my academic career, in terms of teaching performance analysis. And that was an opportunity that I got. So the university that I graduated from recognised that there would be plenty of other students going through the system just like I did, needing to understand how analysis works in actual practice. So it was a no-brainer, really. You've got someone there who's done that, who's been through the sort of student system, and we need someone to actually, potentially share some of this knowledge with students that are coming through. It's quite a difficult transition, because at that time, I'd obviously just graduated, and then I ended up teaching students, which, when I think about that from an age perspective, I was teaching people that were maybe 2 years younger than I was. And that's quite difficult, because you start to get the impression of, surely they're going to think, what right have you got to be teaching me? What do you know? You're 2 years ahead of me, that's about it. And they're not wrong. That's something I couldn't change. It was just, age is what it is. I couldn't change that. So I really had to work to be able to convince them that I earned my right to be at the front of that room and to be educating them on this particular topic. And I think I did that with sort of sharing my experiences, telling them about things that I'd done, obviously putting in the academic underpinning to support that. But for me, the highlight really was sharing the experiences and the practices, because that's what a lot of people were interested in. It was, what am I going to experience? In terms of when you came across problems, how did you solve them? So those sorts of things are what people tended to want to know, because they needed to be prepared to go into similar situations. So that sort of took me on that academic trajectory. And obviously my time at Bolton had finished, because it was part of my undergraduate experience. But what I didn't want to do was end up down a pathway where potentially I was going to start becoming outdated. And what I mean by that is that if I only stick to academia and I only look at things from an academic perspective, so just from a research point of view, I'm going to lose the practical element, and I'm going to lose touch with what actually is happening in the external environment. And that's kind of what triggered me into thinking, I can't just have an academic pathway. I need to make sure that I've got a practitioner one as well. So whilst I was working at UCLan, which is the university that I graduated from, I ended up trying to make sure I kept my hand in with analysis at certain clubs that were local at that time. And I got a really good opportunity to do some work with Fleetwood Town. And that really is the major experience that has sort of kicked off the position that I'm in now. And I'll explain why as I go through. But at Fleetwood Town, I got the opportunity to do some first team analysis. And I was the only one there at the time. So obviously Andrew mentioned about, people being very thin on the ground in terms of analysts in rugby. It was similar at that particular time in lower league football clubs, because people didn't have the resource, people didn't have the capacity to be able to offer their time on a voluntary basis, because people had to survive, and that was kind of and it's not really any different to now, but there wasn't as much of a need as there is to gain that advantage that there is today. So the fact that I was going in there and built my relationship up with the manager and the players and just the club itself was a really positive step, and one that definitely sort of pushed me forward into where I am now. And the analysis for the first team at Fleetwood was very different for me. The pressures working at League One, which is what they were in at the time, is very pressurised because, you know, at a club like that where resources are quite limited anyway, if, for example, they're in a position where they're going to lose funds because maybe they don't get the promotion, they don't get to the playoffs, it's significant. And the ripple effect of that significance then starts to fall on even people like myself in the roles that I was in, because, well, I'm not going to be needed anymore, not just because I'm not needed, but they might also not even be able to facilitate me being there. So the chance for me to work there was one that was taken on by the manager at the time, who was Mickey Mellon. And I built up a really nice relationship with him. And, you know, at no point at all did he ever question the work I was doing, the quality of it. And I'm saying that from the point of view of being female. He never came up, ever. The only time that it was an issue was when at half time during a live game, I would need to run across the pitch, and this was literal. So I'd run across the pitch with the laptop, go into his office to plug the laptop in and show him obviously what was on the screen. The female aspect comes into it when there's obviously a changing room that's full of men, because obviously I'm not going in there. So there had to be allowances made for that sort of thing. But the key thing is there were allowances made. And it's a difficult one because I shouldn't really feel that that is a privilege to have allowances made for the fact I'm female. I think it should just be sort of a courtesy. And I would like to see that that is how it was perceived. I don't actually know if that is the case, but I like to think of it in that way. So my gender did not matter there at all. And what eventually happened is, in the fickle world of football, they don't get promoted, the manager gets sacked, which then means that the staff get released. So that's essentially what happened. So you're not necessarily sacked in certain positions, you're just sort of released from your contract if obviously the whole system that you're part of ends up moving somewhere else. So as a result of that, not very long after, Mickey ended up moving to Tranmere Rovers, Shrewsbury Town. And it was at Shrewsbury that I ended up sort of doing slightly different aspects of work. So I didn't necessarily do performance analysis. I started doing more opposition analysis. So I would be sent to games of the opponents that we would be playing the week after, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And I do reports on how we could essentially beat that team. So you're looking really for the strengths and weaknesses across the team, any particular players that you can pinpoint that are worth exploiting and that we can exploit on that pitch. And they're just looking for that advantage of you know, what intel can we gather that's going to be really useful when we come to play them. So that's what I did to start with. And then on the odd occasion, I'd get sent to a game to look for recruitment targets. So I'd be sent to look at, you know, there's a particular player that, you know, we might want. Will you go and do a report on them and we can assess whether we can then get them? And then sometimes I'd be sent to games, not with any targets, but if I wanted to recommend any players that I thought would be worth us getting in. And that was the real first time that I'd been introduced to recruitment. I'd never considered it, never thought about it as a career option. I don't know why, but it was just never on my radar. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it mainly for two reasons, because it transferred my skill sets. So the strengths and weaknesses I was used to looking at for teams, I could now apply to individual players. But it also gave me a lot of time back. So from a work-life balance perspective, it allowed me to go to games, pick some players, do some individual reports that were a lot shorter than opposition reports. And I would get a lot of time back for my weekends, which I didn't have before. So it was kind of a win-win from my perspective. And it was obviously, if you've got commitments and you've got partners and families at home, then it's an impact on them as well. So it was a no-brainer for me, really. It was just something that I wanted to pursue and potentially look at a little bit further down the line. So what then happened was, similar story to Fleetwood. He got sacked. This time moved on to Tranmere. And he asked if I wanted to go with him. So I did. But this time I said I would actually rather just stay in the recruitment side of things. So I don't really want to do the analysis anymore. And they agreed with that. That was fine. So every time I went out to games, it wasn't from an analyst perspective. It was for a recruitment point of view. And it was looking at players we wanted to recruit or could potentially recruit. And this was at first team level. So it was a lot of pressure. But one thing it did was expose me to different people across the recruitment network. So as an example, I might be at a Manchester United under-23s game, but working for Tranmere, but I might be sat next to a scout who works for Tottenham. So we're watching the same game, but I'm very much aware that we have very different budgets. So although the person next to me might be looking for the absolute best player on that pitch and knows that they could potentially be a realistic target, I can't do that because we can't afford that person. So I've got to look for the third or the fourth or even the fifth best player on that pitch because they're more within our remit of what we could actually do and acquire. So having to shift between that, it's very easy to look for the best to, well, yeah, but actually I need to be looking for people that are good enough for our level, but is actually also still affordable for us. And trying to get into that mindset was quite difficult at times. So one thing it highlighted to me was that the network of people working in recruitment was very much male dominated. I never saw another female working in recruitment or scouting at that particular time. The only female representation from a backroom staff perspective, and I'm not even sure you class them as that really, were female agents. So agents that wanted to come in and represent the players. Never saw any other female that was doing what I was doing. But it never put me off. And it actually kind of made me feel quite proud about the fact that, maybe I am the only one, and that's definitely not the case now. But at the time, it seemed very few and far between. And then, as I worked, obviously, from an academic perspective, I'd moved on in that profession as well. So I'd moved on to a different university to teach at. And as part of that move within my academic career, it allowed me to really expand my connections in clubs that were a lot closer to that university, in the hope that I could build partnerships and networks for our students. So one of those partnerships that was built was with Manchester United. So what came with that was opportunities for students to go out and do some analysis in the academy at United. We had a few students who ended up doing projects related around data recruitment. And at the time, my work at Tranmere was we were at a point where we were going to the playoffs, and I knew that if we didn't get to the playoffs, the cycle would repeat itself. And I was kind of fed up with that, to be honest. So I utilised my connection that I'd made at Man United. So if anyone's come across Tony Strudwick before, he was my connection. So Tony was the head of sports science under Alex Ferguson at the time. When I went in to speak to him, he had moved to the head of academy sports science. But he's quite heavily involved in the Wales setup for the national side. So Tony was the person I went to speak to, and I utilised that connection for my own benefit, really, which was to, kind of showcase what I could do, what I'd done in previous clubs, and say, are there any opportunities here for me if, obviously, things don't quite work out at Tranmere? And I sort of knew that was going to be the case at Tranmere anyway. So it wasn't a case of sort of a jumping ship. It was kind of getting off before it sank, that sort of metaphor, really. And I was just very fortunate that at the time, the new recruitment team had come in from Manchester City to replicate their academy structure from a scouting perspective, because Man United felt like they were behind Manchester City and wanted to be ahead. So they actually went in and got a lot of their staff to recreate the structure at United. And I pretty much started at the same time that they did. So I went in for the conversation. There was no formality to it. It was very much a chat with, I think there was 4 people sat in front of me, just about my experiences. Obviously where I lived, because that's a key part of it, because you essentially would be covering a certain region. And really just getting to know you, because you know you've got to be someone that they work with and get on with. So it was a very casual chat that went, obviously it went very well, because that's where I am now, and I've been there for 7 years. So I've been with United's Academy for 7 years, covering anything from 12s to 21s. So I'll go to games. If I had to put a number on it, I can cover anything from 15 to 20 games a month, which is a lot, but that's what I've been used to for 7 years, on top of my full-time role and other extra bits that I do. So that's just kind of the norm for me now. And then what came with that as an opportunity is a more recent thing, which is the opportunity with England Ladies. So that's a very recent role for me. But the fact that I've built up so much experience in recruitment at a Premier League academy on the men's side has been seen as a very favourable quality, I suppose, of what can be translated through to the women's. So it is very different, and I'm noticing that already in terms of the expectations at the different organisations. But one thing for me that's very clear is that I wouldn't have got into these positions without the assistance of a lot of the men that were around me in these roles as well. So Mickey Mellon was a key sort of influence in that. Without his sort of trust in me, I suppose, way back when I was at Fleetwood, I won't be at the point I'm at now. And Jenny mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that she's wrote a book with Amy, and I've got a chapter in that book, and I specifically highlight the role that Mickey has played in that. And after I'd done it, I texted him and I told him, and he said like he's really happy and I'm proud of the achievements, and he can't wait to read the book. But just them people that have took the opportunity to ignore the fact that I'm female and rather just look at the fact of what I can offer from the decisions I make, my opinions are valued. And that's probably one of the key things, your opinions being valued, because I do find it quite difficult at times in a club like United to express my opinions as a female, especially being around so many males. But I quickly remind myself that that's what they employ me to do. They employ me for my opinion. My gender's got nothing to do with it. And that's my issue, actually. It's not anything that they have done. It's my sort of feeling about the situation. So I think it's a really critical one, that you trust in what you can offer, and gender is not a part of that. It's just about having the faith in yourself really to go forward with it. So I think obviously we're coming to the end of the webinar now anyway, but I just want to see if there's any sort of questions that anyone's got, that anybody wants to put forward, because we are coming to the end. Obviously, got 5 minutes left, so I don't want to ignore any questions that anyone might have about anything that I've spoken about, or equally anything that Andrew's mentioned, or Jenny, and we can try and answer them the best that we can. I mean, I'm taking that as a really positive sign that it's been quite insightful, and hopefully we've answered a lot of questions just from our talks anyway. Yeah, Rebecca's sort of put in there that the gender issue is sometimes ours and not the other person's, and I completely agree with that. It's probably quite a difficult thing to even acknowledge and say that's my issue. But I think it's also a societal issue. I think it's something that, you know, it sort of starts to fall into line with that sort of whole imposter syndrome aspect, and, you know, do I have the right to be in this particular arena, for example? And I'd like to think that's going to go away, but I think it's something that needs a bit more work, and I think it's going to get there hopefully in time. But it's some of it is down to us and what we can actually do to control that. So yeah, if anyone has got any sort of final questions, please pop it in the chat. But if not, I think we're okay to wrap up the webinar, if that's okay with you, Pauline.
Yes, that is great. Thank you so much. That was really insightful and just a really lovely evening. Thank you all so much. Thank you to you, Danielle, and to Andrew and Jenny. We really enjoyed that.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. See you soon.